Okay, what a wild week. Elon Musk just tried to take control over OpenAI's nonprofit arm. Sam Altman called him a child. Palmer Luckey is building VR headsets for the US military. And as world leaders met in Paris for a global AI summit, AI video generation hit a massive turning point. Google dropped VO2 right inside of YouTube Shorts. Adobe finally dropped FireFly Video, and Luma dropped a massive upgrade to Ray 2. Oh, and somewhere in the Amazon, LiDAR just discovered another lost city. And trust me, you're going to want to see how all the pieces fit together. Let's get into it. Of course, the talk of the town right now is Elon Musk's surprising $97.4 billion bid for OpenAI's nonprofit arm. Now, this is a larger amount than what OpenAI's nonprofit arm is actually worth. And of course, this is a complication for OpenAI because they're in the process of converting themselves into a for-profit entity. So Sam Altman swiftly clapped back, basically tweeting, "No thank you, but we will buy Twitter for $9.74 billion if you want," moving the decimal point over one spot. And of course, Elon Musk clapped back with swindler, referring to the $500 billion Stargate project, which we'll get to in a second. Now, what makes this interesting is that apparently Sam Altman was sitting at a dinner in Paris for this global AI summit, supposedly very close to Vice President Vance, when he tweeted this statement. Now, in case you need a refresher, OpenAI has a famously convoluted structure where basically you've got this board of directors and this nonprofit company that wholly owns and controls this LLC that then controls this holding company for this nonprofit, plus the employees, plus the investors in this capped profit company of which Microsoft is a minority owner. Now, the real reason OpenAI set up this structure in the first place is basically to go about raising the gobs of money that they need to take on a really well-funded lab like Google DeepMind. And of course, what makes this very annoying for OpenAI is that in this bid, Musk and his consortium of investors are basically putting a much larger value on the nonprofit assets than their theoretical value. Now, look, Musk is super clever here. At minimum, he's basically going to make life hard for OpenAI. What's also interesting here is the OpenAI board is chaired by the same person that chaired the Twitter board when Elon took it over, Brett Taylor. It's a small world in Silicon Valley, let me tell you. But one crucial difference is that given that OpenAI has this sort of nonprofit structure, they're not required to take the largest offer that they get in service of their fiduciary responsibilities. Instead, they're going to reject this, in quotes, embarrassing takeover bid. Now, a bunch of folks were quick to highlight the hypocrisy in Elon's move here because on one hand, he's suing OpenAI for making the transition to for-profit anyway, with Musk basically making the case that he sued OpenAI for defrauding him into making substantial donations to the nonprofit after co-founding it. And of course, they went on to go raise a bunch of capital. But in reality, what happened in the backdrop is Elon Musk was basically like, yo, you're gonna need the money to go up against these big AI labs like Google. Screw this nonprofit thing. Let's roll the entire company into Tesla and of course install Elon Musk at the helm of it. And this is really where the rift of Elon Musk and Sam Altman was formed. Elon went off to go his Tesla thing and suddenly OpenAI rose to prominence several years later. So to keep a consistent stance, Elon Musk responded by saying that he's going to drop the $97 billion bid for OpenAI if it remains a nonprofit. This is again strategic because Elon knows if they stay in that really convoluted nonprofit cap profit structure, it's going to be very hard for them to raise the kind of capital they need to go about scaling out towards AGI. Now, of course, what's really interesting is that as Elon was giving us a lesson in the art of war, world leaders were actually convening in Paris at this global AI summit. Here, the Vice President of the United States, JD Vance, made some really powerful remarks. Let's take a listen.
I'm not here this morning to talk about AI safety, which was the title of the conference a couple of years ago. I'm here to talk about AI opportunity. When conferences like this convene to discuss a cutting-edge technology, oftentimes I think our response is to be too self-conscious, too risk-averse. But never have I encountered a breakthrough in tech that so clearly calls us to do precisely the opposite. We need international regulatory regimes that fosters the creation of AI technology rather than strangles it. And we need our European friends in particular to look to this new frontier with optimism rather than trepidation. Now, this administration will not be the one to snuff out the startups and the grad students producing some of the most groundbreaking applications of artificial intelligence. Instead, our laws will keep big tech, little tech, and all other developers on a level playing field.
Now, this point is interesting, right? Like basically what he's saying is that, hey, like every time you do regulations, the biggest companies actually benefit the most because they're the ones that have massive legal teams, massive product teams that can go about implementing, GDPR or DMA or pick your regulatory regime. And it's the smaller startups that just can't compete, right? Like, so this is basically what underpinned the California AI regulation getting overturned at the very last minute, because it would actually make it very, very hard for smaller companies to comply. And so it's interesting, this administration's taking the stance of, hey, we're going to help the incumbents, but we're also going to help the startups. And of course, you've heard the EU meme, right? Like most of the features just don't come out in Europe whatsoever, and we need to change that. And hopefully we're seeing this summit as a step towards that future.
Now, there's no issue where we worry about more than regulation when it comes to energy. And again, I appreciated the comments of so many at the conference because they recognize that we stand now at the frontier of an AI industry that is hungry for reliable power and high-quality semiconductors.
Now, what's actually interesting about this is the French actually have a huge advantage when it comes to nuclear power, and it may well be one of the countries where a lot of this data center capacity might migrate in the EU, given their very robust energy infrastructure. Another area where Vance is very, very clear is his stance on China. Now, he doesn't name them directly, but listen to what he had to say.
Now, we've also watched as hostile foreign adversaries have weaponized AI software to rewrite history, surveil users, and censor speech. This is hardly new, of course. As they do with other tech, some authoritarian regimes have stolen and used AI to strengthen their military, intelligence, and surveillance capabilities, capture foreign data, and create propaganda to undermine other nations' national security. I want to be clear. This administration will block such efforts, full stop. We will safeguard American AI and chip technologies from theft and misuse, work with our allies and partners to strengthen and extend these protections, and close pathways to adversaries attaining AI capabilities that threaten all of our people. And I would also remind our international friends here today that partnering with such regimes, it never pays off in the long term. From CCTV to 5G equipment, we're all familiar with cheap tech in the marketplace.
I wonder who he's talking about. CCTV and 5G?
That's been heavily subsidized and exported by authoritarian regimes. But as I know, and I think some of us in this room have learned from experience, partnering with them means chaining your nation to an authoritarian master that seeks to infiltrate, dig in, and seize your information infrastructure.
Now, the first interesting piece of context here is that in November, we figured out that Chinese researchers were actually developing a model for military use for ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance use, and it was built on top of Meta's Llama. What's funny is at that time, even US-based defense companies and the Department of Defense itself could not make use of Meta's Llama because it was against their terms of service. And so shortly after this news dropped, Meta actually changed their terms of service to let US national security agencies and defense contractors use Llama. So clearly this Cold War between China and the US is heating up. And in fact, you could probably guess, given the sharpness of JD Vance's remarks, DeepSeek actually skipped the Paris AI Summit. Now, DeepSeek really shook things up, right? Because it's one thing to use Llama and figure stuff out. It's another thing to create a consumer application that's available in the US and rest of the world and is topping App Store charts. And the fact that they did it with a team mostly made up of new grads and undergrad interns is pretty freaking cool, even if they tried to extract insights from OpenAI's own models. Now, to give you another example of this tension between the US and China, Senator Hawley in the United States is actually trying to pass a law which would basically make it illegal to download DeepSeek in the US. And if you do, you'd face 20 years in prison and $100 million fine. Now, of course, this is a proposed bill. This hasn't actually passed. But given the ongoing tensions with ByteDance and TikTok, you can see where this is headed. You're seeing sort of this decoupling taking place between the US and China, which of course is very hard given how inextricably linked they actually are. Now, this China tension is also the reason that the US is basically providing for why they didn't sign this Paris Summit declaration on inclusive AI, essentially saying that we felt the declaration didn't provide enough practical clarity on global governance nor sufficiently address harder questions around national security and the challenge AI poses to it. And look, I understand why. OpenAI has basically changed their roadmap, right? Like, so they're going to rush to drop Orion. They're going to call that GPT 4.5. And they're going to have a free tier of ChatGPT that's going to get unlimited chat access to GPT-5. And of course, to justify their two new axes of scaling, right? Like you've got sort of inference time or test time compute, and then you've got, pre-training. What they're saying is they're going to be like different tiers of intelligence, standard intelligence being the one that's going to be available to all users for free, which is true. I mean, because you could go download DeepSeek right now and basically get an O1 class model for free, or frickin' download the weights and host it yourself. And what's funny is Anthropic is basically converging on the same roadmap too. It's going to be like this traditional LLM plus reasoning AI, and then some ability to basically have a slider for like how much intelligence do you want to throw at this thing. In other words, everyone on the US is converging on a similar roadmap. But let's be honest here, this has been in response to DeepSeek. Now, given AI is one of the most powerful dual-use technology, meaning that it has applications both in consumer, enterprise, but of course defense as well, means that there's actually a lot of money at play here. And so in case you missed it, Palantir and Anduril, two of the leading defense tech companies in the United States, have created this new alliance basically to get the help of all these big AI labs. And pretty much everyone is in the mix, whether it's Meta, OpenAI, they're all going after these contracts. Now, this is a pretty freaking hilarious headline, but really, this is a massive land grab opportunity for all of these tech companies. Heck, even Grok is integrating with Palantir. And of course, OpenAI launched ChatGPT for government agencies just last month. So if we go back to our friends Elon and Sam here, they're both connected to the US Department of Defense, just in very different ways. Of course, OpenAI is building for the defense apparatus. It's lauded as the main AI thing in America, with Project Stargate valued at $500 billion over the next couple of years. And of course, if you forgot, the ex-NSA director is also on the board of OpenAI. Oh, and by the way, not just the NSA, but also the commander of US Cyber Command, which basically does both offensive and defensive cybersecurity. So we're basically talking about the equivalent of soldiers in the digital realm. So what this means is basically in this ongoing saga, Sam has secured his position with the current Trump administration. He's in a good spot. He doesn't need to worry too much, which is why he's clapping back. Now, at the same time, it probably doesn't hurt that Elon is deep with the DoD too. Like, of course he's running Doge, but let's leave aside Doge for a second, the Department of Government Efficiency for the uninitiated. Elon is obviously a huge defense contractor with the work that he's doing with Starlink and SpaceX. And he's got fans in the defense apparatus. Not only is SpaceX sending up spy satellites on the regular, Starlink itself is extremely strategically important in all these battle spaces where Russia tries to jam communications. In effect, Starlink is the only thing that can't be jammed. It can also provide location services if you want, and in my opinion, they're probably doing Earth observation as well. Now, I've made a video about this previously, going deep into the full map of Elon's companies and how they come together to create a really, really immaculate global control structure. But for now, what you need to know is that the US government is actually exceedingly dependent on Elon. And given how close he is to the current administration, he feels that he can go publicly badmouth perhaps the most important AI company coming out of the United States that President Trump himself is touting to the rest of the world. Now, of course, not everyone is happy about their dependence on Elon. So for example, the Ministry of Defense in the UK has ended up going with Jeff Bezos' company because they're worried that Musk might have like total control of what's going on in space. Which perhaps brings me back to the fact that actually, really the tech giants are going to continue to go deeper with the Department of Defense. Heck, even Google, which publicly took a stance after employees revolted against Project Maven, has dropped that promise not to use AI for weapons. And while this might seem alarming, if you take a step back, it again makes sense if you consider the dual use nature of this tech. You're going to be building this tech anyway. It's no longer a decision of like, oh, we're going to go and build all these crazy capabilities. No. If you're building these foundational models, there's a bunch of other companies and startups or teams within the DoD or various government agencies that can just use that general purpose platform capability and build their defense specific applications. Especially as we're talking talking about multimodal understanding and all this type of stuff. What's the difference between analyzing a security camera feed versus a traffic camera feed versus a drone feed versus your own frickin' multi-camera event footage so you can figure out what clips to detect or find the right shot with this person in it? I mean, it's all the same underlying capabilities. Now, speaking of lucrative military contracts, one contract that Microsoft is trying to dump is the one for IVAS, which is Department of Defense speak for the Integrated Visual Augmentation System, essentially a mixed reality headset. Now, this thing was going to be based around Microsoft's HoloLens headset, and they did do a bunch of testing. Apparently, it didn't go very well. Calibration issues, like this thing was not designed to take the bumps and tossles that you expect in the field, right? Like it's one thing to be using a HoloLens when you're sitting in like a workspace designing a car. It's a whole thing entirely when you're in some other part of the world in very arid conditions. And basically, let's just say you've got sand all around you. Now, over the years, Microsoft has been outsourcing more and more of their VR capabilities to Meta. Like back in 2022, they went deep in a Meta partnership, basically saying, hey, we'll supply the software and the cloud services and bring a bunch of stuff to your headsets. You keep making the VR headsets. Up until that point, Microsoft was actually making their own mixed reality headsets with the likes of Lenovo, with the likes of HP, etc. Now, even though the IVAS program had potential, and given the testing went kind of poorly and given Microsoft's like shifting priorities, it was thus no surprise, at least to me, that Microsoft is discontinuing its HoloLens headsets. So this past October, they basically say, hey, we're not going to support the old headsets anymore, nothing new's coming. Now, this, of course, left the US military in an awful position. It's like, how the hell do we make this happen? And the person that came to rescue Microsoft, and DoD in this case, is none other than Palmer Luckey, one of the co-founders of Oculus. And what is his goal? His goal is turning soldiers into superheroes. Now, if you're not into sensor systems like I am, thermal and night vision sensing has made immense leaps over the last decade. I mean, so this is what the state of the art looks like right now, at least that's public to us in a civilian capacity, is basically night vision plus thermal. So as you can see, all the thermal entities, like people who are putting off a heat signature, are popping out of this night vision landscape, yet you can see everything else as well. Now, what is the natural thing to overlay over here is a bunch of augmented reality overlays, right? Like if you've got your satellites, your drones mapping out the space, detecting things, you want to be able to pinpoint those on the map in a visualization like this. Hey, if that's the specific door you're supposed to knock down, here's an expectation of what you see behind the door itself. This illustrates the night vision and thermal fusion even better. Here you can see what traditional night vision looks like. If you ever played like Call of Duty or something like that, you always get this like sort of green night vision. Usually these are optical systems that can even amplify like moonlight to let you see what's going on around you. And now you could do this digitally too. If you take something like the Sony a7S III camera and just crank up the ISO on a moonlit night, I mean, you will see crystal clear right outside. These systems do it optically, but then you can also add a digital thermal sensor that's going to overlay the heat signature of everything it sees on top of it, giving you immaculate situational awareness at night. So here's what you can see where the various modes look like. You've got this sort of edge contrast type mode, but you can also toggle and see some other stuff. That's what the thermal view looks like. If you're just looking at thermal, increasing the gain over here, it looks like, just so they can take a better look. And there you go. So in the backdrop there is optical night vision, and then you've got your digital thermal overlaid, synchronized on top of that. Now, artificial intelligence needs to be infused into the stack, right? But you also want all the other sensors that are going to be in the battle space, right? Your satellite systems, your drone systems, aerial platforms, other folks with lasers and rangefinders that are going to be targeting different things, the sensor systems that can be on the vehicles on the ground, and basically create a fused map of the battle space and make that available to the soldier on the ground and the commander at HQ. And so this is basically what Palmer Luckey wants to do. And this is, in a sense, homecoming for Palmer, because the way he got exposed to AR VR was basically working at a USC ICT lab in the University of Southern California that did contracts for the Department of Defense. So tactical heads-up displays that turn warfighters into technomancers and pairs us with weaponized robotics were one of the products in the original Anduril pitch for a reason. Now, to give you a sense of what that interplay between AR VR systems and robotic systems looks like, let's take a look at this example from Meta, perhaps also illustrating the dual-use nature of this technology. Basically, Meta's fundamental AI research team is looking at all these like Boston Dynamic robots and seeing, hey, how do we use like Orion glasses to glean insight into what it is that the robot is focused on? Like, hey, this is the task that it's planning to do. And once it's mapped the space, decided what action to take, you can sort of interrogate and inspect that action in context and correct it if needed. I mean, imagine this being like a bomb disposal robot, or this robot being the first one to breach a door as it's going in Navy SEAL style. Now, see, of course, it doesn't matter if you're using Orion glasses or a Quest 3 headset, whatever it is, basically these spatial computing devices are the right sort of interface to see what the robot is planning to do and direct it to do other things. And let me just tell you, it's interesting because the government already has access to some pretty insane sensor systems. Now, what also makes Anduril very uniquely positioned for this is their platform called Lattice. As the name sort of suggests, it basically brings together all these sensor systems, both sensor systems that they operate, right? Like they're building a bunch of these sensor systems that are used to secure military bases. They're used on the border, but they're also making all sorts of drones. They're making submarine systems, but they can also integrate with every other kind of platform the DoD has access to, giving you this sort of unified, fused picture of the battlefield. Again, sensor fusion is a huge part of this. You use computer vision. You're going to do a bunch of computation at the edge. You're doing some in the cloud. And what's the goal over here? It's basically to detect, track, and classify every single object of interest in an operator's vicinity. So you take those objects of interest and you overlay them on a platform like this. I think that's the future. So you take all those detections that you're making from all these different sensor systems and make them available to the soldier in the battlefield from that first-person perspective. This is going to be very, very powerful. And by the way, the edge is very important, just like we're talking about being able to run private models at the edge on our own machines, right? So you don't have to send all your data up to OpenAI or whatever. This is also very important in public sector applications like this, where the latency requirements or the connectivity requirements are just so bad that you need the ability to have these systems operate nicely at the edge. And this is another place where Anduril has a huge leg up. So this is where everything seems to be going, right? Like basically you can have a single person operating multiple autonomous systems versus a whole team of people trying to keep one system going. That's the kind of force multiplier that Palmer is trying to bring to this headset and this program, because it really, really gets us one step closer to that Halo-style super soldier. It's kind of wild. Now, these systems, whether it's Anduril or Palantir, they're all working together, right? Like even Anthropic, like Claude, which is like the most about AI safety and sort of hems and haws about all these existential risks, is also partnering up with Amazon Palantir to bring AI to the Department of Defense. So I think it's very important to look at not just what companies say, but what their actions are. Now, I'd argue that mapping is one of the most dual-use technologies out there. I know, I spent 4 years working on Google Maps. And to just give you another example of like how the same sort of technologies are applicable to a consumer application too, is we're talking about battle space awareness, right? Like what about awareness of the basketball field? I mean, that's exactly what NBA Tabletop View in the Vision Pro does. This just came out and the homie Justin Ryan covered it beautifully, right? You can see 3D reconstructions of every single person on the field. Now, this is a driven avatar. They're using basically machine vision cameras to estimate the full body pose and driving essentially these NBA style characters. But it's the same thing. And this is just the consumer version. The analytics that are exposed to the teams to actually improve their own performance is even greater. I mean, this is some wild, wild stuff, but think about it. How is this any different than the technology you're building for the battlefield? So in summary, whether it's public or private sector applications of this tech, it's really all about physical and digital reality truly merging together. Now, while all these power players are fighting for control, the tools for creating reality actually became a lot more accessible. So Adobe finally rolled out FireFly video generation. I've had early access and been playing with it, and it's really, really impressive. They're really focusing on control. So you can do both portrait and vertical aspect ratios. You've got control over shot size and camera angle, very similar to stuff that you had on the image side is available here. You can control the motion as well. And you've got seed level granularity if you want to lock down the seed and get more consistent generations. You can also upload the first frame, the last frame, and tween between them. And the quality is pretty good. I would say like if you're going to prompt things that are very close to the kind of things that you expect to see in, a stock footage data set, it's going to do a pretty good job. It's fairly good. I don't think it's as good as VO2. It's nowhere near that quality. But let's take a second and actually applaud the fact that we have at least one tech company that's focusing on building a more commercially safe model. Now, a lot of folks are debating the definition of commercially safe. Does it actually matter, et cetera? Like the stringency that Adobe goes through to make sure that there's no copyrighted material that infringes like IP, like I don't know, Marvel Avenger stuff or like Mickey Mouse or something like that into the training data, does it really matter that they're scrubbing their data set when somebody could just use Midjourney but not create violative content with it? In other words, the artist is the person that's doing the moderation saying, hey, I'm not going to create like a Thanos clone and try to copyright it. I'm just going to do everything else, but you can still take advantage of the model being very good because it's seeing a lot more diverse set of content. Now, I encourage you to go play with it for yourself. It's really, really cool, especially if you have like an Adobe subscription already. So I think what I'm excited about is a lot of companies that have been hesitant to play with some of the other video generation models can actually go about doing this because their legal departments will let them. In another interesting twist, Google VO2 as of today is available inside the YouTube application. Let me walk you through it very quickly. Here's how it works. Basically, when you're in the Shorts flow, you click on your camera roll here on the bottom left, then you can hit create to get into this video generation flow. And essentially what we're dealing with is text to image to video. So for example, so you can jump in here, basically type in a text prompt, and you get a bunch of these different styles to choose from, including pixel art, which works quite well. You'll get 4 image generations, and then you can click one to turn into a video. Here, let me try and modify the prompt just a little bit so I can have something a little bit more dramatic, like a chihuahua chasing a small car in New York City. Times Square, baby. And so here we go. Okay, this is a lot more like it. I can select an image to go with. I'm just going to go with this for now. And then you just hit create video. You can't prompt it any further. In the VO desktop application, you get 2 sets of prompts where you define the scene, get an image first, and then you can kind of prompt the motion too. Of course, they're trying to keep it a lot simpler. The crazy thing about this is the video generation is exceedingly fast. And as I mentioned this morning, I'm fairly certain that this is a distilled model that's optimized for serving. I mean, obviously, YouTube's got 1 billion users, and even though this is only in the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand for now, there's still a lot more usage than in the early access program for Google VO2. What's cool is they managed to still retain the really high quality physics rendition that you get with a bigger model. Unlike Sora, which is just a warbly mess as we've covered extensively in our video on VO2. What's cool is you can take multiple clips and put them together in this timeline. And so that's awesome, right? Like, so let's say you want to mix live action footage that you've recorded with your camera and then have like VO clip come in. You could totally do that too. And I have to expect, and just to make a point about the physics being good, helicopters are notoriously difficult for AI video models to create. Let me show you what happens in this case. And so here you go. The propellers look amazing. Now, what I will say is these models aren't very good at adding motion in all the time. So for example, if you look at this clip over here, the cars are moving, but the doggo is awfully still over here. This is an issue that I've noticed in the video effects text to image to video flow too, where you really have to modify the prompts quite a bit to get the image to video to look decent. Otherwise, it's just overly static. So I suspect since they're doing that automatically in the background over here, it's not always perfect. So in summary, even though this is a distilled model optimized for serving, it's pretty amazing that we've got free access to VO2 inside the YouTube Shorts app. Now, you can't do horizontal clips. It is limited to vertical. Clearly, they're trying to push this towards Shorts because Shorts is sort of the only on-ramp YouTube has right now for content creation. Now, who I think this is going to be really cool for is basically creators that would have never bothered to go learn a bunch of desktop applications that already create on the phone in their pocket. And now they've got a VFX studio right inside here for free inside of the YouTube application. So hopefully this is coming to the EU and Asia Pacific very, very soon. But for now, if you're in one of these regions, go have fun with it. And people are doing some cool stuff with it already. Check out what B-Sprouts did over here. It's basically, I mean, like you can make some really, really fun stuff. That husky is in the vibes. And if you look at just like the chord progression and the chord transition over there, that looks really, really good. This is way, way better than Sora. In related news, ByteDance, the parent company of TikTok, dropped an amazing model and paper called Goku, basically flow-based video generation. So this is a transformer-based architecture, and it's jointly trained on image and video data. And it's particularly good at creating AI advertising. So let's look at a bunch of these generations. Really good high frequency detail. The whiskers are intact. Snow and physics looks really good. Shopping looks really good. So here you can see a bunch of portrait video demos where really the influencer angle becomes a lot more obvious. Now, they've created a fine-tuned version of this model called Goku Plus, a video ads foundational model. And just take a look at this stuff. If you use things like Imagen or Synthesia, etc., this is basically that on steroids, right? So you've got a nice little photo that your artist made, or maybe even you made in Canva, you drop it in here and suddenly it turns into this immaculate video clip. So if you're trying to onboard advertisers that, let's say, have image assets or don't want to deal with influencers because they're a small to medium enterprise and they don't have the budget for it, this gives them sort of an on-ramp to start creating content. So here's a couple of examples I pulled apart, and you can really see if you're doing like UGC advertising, I mean, you're kind of cooked right now. And the reason I say that is, if you're not familiar with UGC advertising, it's essentially small creators that get paid to create this type of content for brands so that when you go search for something, you can see that, oh my God, there's like a bunch of user reviews. And even if it's like a 100 subscriber channel, you think it's legit because somebody's reviewed it. Now, this kind of content could be easily swapped with what ByteDance has created over here. And I suspect where this will get plugged into is TikTok's own Symphony Creative Studio. They already roll this out. Basically, you provide a URL, right? Like your landing page, and it'll create a video. It'll create the avatar, and heck, it'll dub it in 30 languages. So yeah, in my opinion, I am not sure how UGC creators will survive this wave, right? Like, your only option is to create your own island of influence, right? A community that trusts you authentically for who you are, and hope that that is a reasonable moat. But who knows? It's this really weird feeling that at least I get, and I wonder if you do too, where every single video you upload, every single post you make on whatever platform, you feel like you're effectively training your own AI replacement. Now, if I look at that positively, I'm like, hey, I'm training my AI digital twin that I should be able to call on to scale myself. But when you see a company like ByteDance drop this sort of model that's clearly trained on a bunch of TikTok content, or even Google drop a model that's trained on a bunch of YouTube videos, it makes you a little bit fearful. So in this case, I'm actually happy that Google isn't going down this like super AI generated content route for advertising and all this other crazy stuff to replace human creators. They're instead trying to empower creators, saying like, hey, this is in the Shorts app, why don't you do something with it? And as I covered in my previous video, they're rolling out an API for VO2 as well, so you can expect to see it in a bunch of different applications. Now, speaking of other video models, Luma Labs has also rolled out Ray 2, which is capable of image to video. And the quality is pretty good. I wouldn't say that it's at like Sora quality just yet, but it's fairly decent. I mean, I do get some examples of weird physics. Like I get a lot of this like floatiness and kind of like the disconnected nature of reality. I rarely get things like this in VO2, but then again, this is available. That said, it is not available in the free plan. You have to get the premium plan to even try this stuff, again, because they probably just don't have the GPU capacity to support that kind of user base right now. So they have to limit it to premium users. So these are all image to video examples, generations that I did in Midjourney that I dropped in over here. And again, as we covered in the previous video, there's a bunch of different paradigms for how you bring all this together. Luma's clearly leaning into this chat style interface and that can do some pretty cool things with it. This is pretty funny. Or the confrontation between the man and the alien. He's like almost, oh gosh, he was almost about to karate chop him, but yo, the alien didn't flinch whatsoever, despite the whack. Kind of looks like Biden if you ask me. It's super funny. Yeah, here's some like retro style generation. This one's pretty cool. Not bad at all. So if vertical video is not your jam and you're super annoyed and don't want to wait for VO2 access, though again, it seems the API is coming out soon. Now, this actually makes me wonder if the API that Google is going to offer to other folks is going to be this faster to serve model, or if it's going to be the more expensive one. Are they going to offer both variants or not? Regardless, if you don't want to wait for any of that and you want to start playing with something that's pretty close to state of the art, I mean, go get a Luma subscription right now. I mean, of course, Kling and MinMax is still really, really good too. And if you want commercially safe, you got FireFly. So you got options, my friend. Just go play with them. Now, if you don't care about any of this and you're interested in taking advantage of creative upscaling, I actually got access to Topaz Starlight, which I covered in my previous video as well. And the results are pretty cool. I took this video of like, this old historic video of going down the Embarcadero near the San Francisco ferry building. And you can see the results are really, really cool. It definitely removes all the scratches. It's using a diffusion model to add in some high frequency detail. You can see in the clock tower and the windows over there. It doesn't do a great job of fixing like the exposure changes and sort of the splotchiness. I think there could be another pass on top. Let me show you the slider view. This will do it a lot better. Quite a huge difference. It's funny, many years ago, I launched AI upscaling for all the satellite imagery inside of Google Maps. And the way I described it to my VP at the time was like, yo, this is like putting on a fresh pair of glasses. And that's exactly what it feels like. Now, I tried running an AI generated clip through it as well. And you can see, yeah, it adds in some of that high frequency detail. You can see the hair is there's definitely more detail, but it's not that much better. So I think like if you're hoping to upscale AI video generations, I think like you're not going to see a huge leap if you're already using Topaz video AI. It's pretty cool to see the text looks way sharper here. Again, let me show you the side by side. Let me switch to the swiping view. So here you go. You can really see the before and after difference over here. And again, it's like putting on a fresh pair of glasses. The user interface, like the text overlay on the recording over here really comes to life, if you see. Now, I did also try to take my visual effects tutorial from when I was 12 years old and run it through AI, and it did some funky things. Like, okay, the side profile, not so bad, but with faces, given that this is creative upscaling, sort of magnific style, as we've discussed previously, it does some weird things to my face. I don't know who that guy is. So kind of weird over there, but still very cool to see my old, high 8 mini DV videos even. These are high 8 clips get recorded though. Yeah, that doesn't look like me. Though this is very cool to see that it does work. This is a free preview. Basically, you get 3 free generations per week right now, and you can pay to get early access to this as well. So as y'all start getting access to Topaz Starlight, check your emails or check your Twitter DMs, which is how I was informed. This is what you can expect. Now, another tool that I've been playing with recently is Imagen 3. You can get this for free inside of Image Effects by Google. And it's really good. There's also an API, so you get it in FAL and a bunch of other tools. You can get some really good generations. It seems a lot of people want to see these TED Talks, including my homies at TED themselves. Now, what's cool is Google is actually #1 right now on LMArena's text-to-image leaderboard, which is really crazy, right? Like, it's ahead of Ideogram, which I would say is like by far the best model right now. All in one, if you want to do text, image, everything, that's the model I would recommend. But of course, people really love Flux because, it's open weights. You can fine tune it. You can do a bunch of interesting things. Recraft is very popular too. But yeah, we've got a bunch of these options. And of course, creators are doing really cool things with it, right? Like, as my buddy Charlie Fink posted, the best Star Wars movie this year was made with AI. Now, I'm not going to sit here and debate just how good the movie was. It is freaking amazing considering that it's made entirely with AI. Yes, I'm sure you could find a bunch of issues with it, spam it with a bunch of soulless comments, but the fact that we're going from splotchy, unintelligible, psychedelic videos just a year or two ago to some of the most impressive looking Star Wars fan films is pretty freaking impressive. And as we discussed in the last video, pushing towards long form narratives too. Now, if you combine all these AI image and video tools with sort of meta trends taking place, for example, it is now official that more people watch YouTube on TV than they do on mobile and computers. And let me tell you, my analytics confirm this, especially in the US. It is pretty clear that YouTubers are becoming the startups of Hollywood. And this is from the CEO of YouTube himself. Now, there's already a bunch of these channels that are doing amazing content that's like pushing towards Netflix OTT quality. So what this means is you'll start seeing the rise of this sort of generative AI content studio, Promise being a great example. So George and Jamie are both ex-YouTube. David Clark, obviously, has been doing amazing stuff in the video space and is a traditional director. And so they've hired a bunch of my homies. It's actually going to be really cool to see how this pans out. A16Z, who I venture scout for, is a huge investor in them. Meta Puppet is in the mix. The homie Uncanny Harry is in the mix. And I think this is just the beginning of what you'll see over here. Because it's not just YouTube that's taking notice that, hey, YouTube creators are becoming the new startups of Hollywood. It is venture capital themselves. So Slow Ventures, for example, has rolled out a dedicated creator fund. Their whole idea is, hey, we're not going to go after the celebrities. We're going to go after real creators who form an authentic relationship with the audience, building their island of influence, if you will, and do that first. That's the part that they're going to fund before they go about spinning out businesses. And so if you look at what Mark Rober has done, initially advertising a bunch of other brands, eventually creating his own company and advertising it. So you have your top of funnel, and then you have the offer that you're pushing everyone to. So if you look at the list of LPs for this fund, it's actually really impressive. We've got like impressive academic institutions, like traditional investors that you would expect, also seeing value in this creator fund, with the ideal outcome for them being essentially catching like, the Dude Perfect or the Mr. Beast very early on, and you own a percentage of their holding company under which all their other businesses, including the creator business, would sit. So I'm just super, super excited about this because suddenly independent creators, right? Like smaller creators, whether you're solo, whether you're building a small team, you can punch way above your weight class. And that makes things very, very exciting. I love this visualization by the homie Macro Block, basically like painting things out and then running it through image to video. And so in my opinion, that stuff is like 12, 18 months out tops, right? Like Macro super excited about Topaz upscaler to take this stuff to the next level. I mean, all the pieces are coming together, y'all. But just to keep our sobriety about this a little bit too, I mean, this isn't the death of Hollywood. It's a transformation of Hollywood, right? Like Hollywood is going to set whole new standards altogether too, especially as more commercially safe models hit the scene, such as the stuff that Moon Valley's building, which I'll cover in a future video. And I think a good analogy here is AI coding too. If you go read Twitter or if you go watch a bunch of YouTube videos, like, oh my God, coding is dead. Like everyone's going to be replaced by Cursor AI agent. And then you go actually use Cursor and it's like, holy crap, I'm going to need like the Zen of Rick Rubin over here to basically nudge and guide this model into doing exactly what I want. And I'm not capping, this resonated with a lot of people, right? Like folks who are actually using this tool are basically like, gosh, you're totally right. Oh my God, this is so cathartic. I feel so validated. And how many times have you run into this, right? Like when you're trying to wrangle an image generator or a video generator to just make that slight edit, that slight tweak. That's where knowing traditional tools is super useful too. That's where knowing coding is super useful as well. So I don't think that's going to change, but what is going to change is you are going to be able to punch way above your weight class. It is going to have this force multiplier effect. And so I'm excited to see what the shape of long form YouTube looks like in 12 to 18 months. We're going to see far more impressive content that's going to mix live action artist created stuff with AI generated stuff. And it's going to rival the quality of a Netflix movie. And that's going to be awesome for everyone because YouTube is the new TV. This is the stuff that kids watch these days. And rather than having that one blockbuster that is syndicated in all sorts of different locations, by the way, which is going to happen because it's going to be localized in every single language, you're going to have a bunch of original content that just would not have been made otherwise. And yes, there will be a lot of slop too. But as is the case with email spam, we become very quick to classify that and put that out of sight, out of mind, and focus on the real juicy stuff. And it's fascinating, right? As we're using these technologies to generate entirely new worlds, we're also discovering our existing world. Perhaps coming full circle to this dual use nature of this technology, the same kind of mapping tech you'd use to build situational awareness of the battle space is actually teaching us about our history. You might remember this past November, I talked about this crazy example where a PhD student at Tulane University looked at a 2013 LiDAR dataset that he discovered off of Google, their first page of results from Google, and found a whole ass city that was unknown to the scientific community. Well, that happened again. A new lost city was discovered in the Amazon. This time, it's a 15th century city in southern Mexico. And these are the kind of breakthroughs that we can expect to see, right? Like, as we better connect the physical and digital worlds and throw AI intelligence against it, we've got all these data sets sitting around. We've got all these sensing platforms sitting around, and we can use them for all sorts of purposes, whether it's advancing your agenda on the battlefield or discovering our history in the past, whether it's creating visual content that entertains billions or it's creating propaganda that influences billions. Now, what's clear is I'm going to keep pushing on the frontier of emerging tech, mapping the breakthroughs, the blind spots, and the reality-bending technologies that are shaping our world. I hope this geopolitical dual-use adventure we went on was interesting to you, because I hope to keep making content like this that can serve as sort of your atlas for the future of both creation and computing. And if you made it to the end, I'm so stoked to talk to you right now because we are navigating the frontier together. I'm really blown away by the amazing feedback you're giving me on my videos. And it sounds like y'all like it when I get nerdy with y'all. So I'm gonna keep doing that. Meanwhile, please do me a favor and hit that like button, drop a comment below, hit subscribe if you haven't already. Most of you have not subscribed based on the analytics, and hit that bell icon, turn on notifications. It really helps as I'm growing this channel from scratch. That's it for me, Bilal signing off, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Cheers.